Welcome to the review of my 2017 Subaru BRZ. I've owned this car for about a year, so it's about time that I do review it. It has a 2-liter flat 4-cylinder. That's a Subaru engine, and this car has a 6-speed manual transmission. So we'll start with the exterior of the car. I really like the styling on this car. I wanted one in World Rally Blue, and I think this color is perfect. Having always admired Subarus in this color, the old STIs, WRXs with the gold wheels, I really wanted one in this color. Was glad to find it, took a little bit of searching, and this is a model year 2017, and that year saw numerous improvements and updates. That was the mid-cycle refresh. So it included enhancements to the engine, it included different rear axle ratio, LED headlights, tail lights, I think some touchscreen improvements inside too. So if you're looking for one, I think 2017 plus are the model years to get. And then this is the base model, also called the premium model. And I feel like it has enough, definitely performance and content, that it's really up to you if you want to step up to the limited model. So exterior styling, that's a matter of taste. Like I said, I really like it. I do prefer a more subtle spoiler in the rear. This spoiler is functional. It does reduce the drag coefficient, but I do like more of a ducktail spoiler. Wheels look all right. What I like about the wheels on the BRZ and 86 Twins is that they are a square setup, which means that you can rotate them from rear to front, so you can maintain even tire wear, unlike the Boxster, which has wider tires in the rear. On this model, you see 215 45s and 17s. Car drives really nice on 17s. And these Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires are absolutely incredible. I'm very happy that I spent the extra money and went with them. I highly recommend them. The brakes in this car work really well. Absolutely no issues. They're pretty immediate. And in this car I put StopTech 309 brake pads and StopTech .4 brake fluid as well. One of the things that attracted to this car over an ND2 Miata is the fact that it does have a trunk. I have put 4 wheels in there, and also the fact that it has 2 small back seats that fold down. So it is somewhat practical for daily usage. Gas mileage has been great. On the highway, on long road trips, I typically average just over 30 miles to the gallon. Usually around 31, 32. It does use premium fuel, as does the ND2 Miata. So look at some of the mechanical features of the car. I'll pop the hood. So mechanically, I already mentioned that the braking system is excellent, no complaints there. Tires on this car are great. I think those 4S's are optional on the new generation of the BRZ. Okay, so underneath the hood, this is the flat 4. Remember when this car first came out, I was a little bit disappointed that it didn't get a Toyota motor, because I would like that Toyota reliability. But if it's possible to show, that's where the top of the motor sits on the car. You see, it's not much higher than the top of the actual tires. It has an incredibly low center of gravity. Standing up, the top of the motor is almost even with the top of my knees. So that's one of the reasons why they were able to choose this motor over a Toyota source power plant, because it offers that really low center of gravity, offers neater packaging than an inline 4 would have offered. These 2017 model years have this nice crinkle coat red aluminum intake manifold. I think it looks great, especially when it's surrounded by that blue. And then on my car, it has a parent intake elbow, which kind of smooths the airflow from the air box into the throttle body. The throttle body was a little bit dirty with around 40,000 miles on it, so I did clean that when I had it off. Everything that I've read, done a lot of research, by and large is recommended to keep the factory air intake system. You're not going to gain a whole lot with cold air intake, and you may actually wind up running into some issues with the car pulling power. So really that's all that's required. And then with this intake elbow, it deletes the sound tube enhancer that these cars have, which I have no need for. I really don't need sound piped into the cabin. In order to do jobs like spark plugs, it's a very labor-intensive job that you can look into. It's not as easy to work on as a Miata would be, and it actually seems a little bit more difficult to work on than my Boxster. Just because my Boxster, everything's easily accessible from underneath the car, but with this engine, you actually have to do a lot of the maintenance with the engine out. But you still do have things like a real dipstick, which in 2017, I guess there's a fair amount of cars made without it. Oil filters, easy to get to. Oil changes are straightforward. So this car does have enough power. I read a lot about the torque dip with this car. I think about 50% of buyers wouldn't notice it. I did notice it with that intake elbow, and then I have a high flow cat on the mid pipe. That woke the car up. I still do notice a torque dip with the open flash tablet tune. It does smooth it out a little bit, but it still is there. I think this car with an aftermarket FT Speed unequal length catted header would be absolutely perfect. I think that's really all the power that you need. Should get rid of that torque dip, and it should still make it fun to ring out. I'm not somebody that likes a lot of power on the road. I'd rather wind out the gears and have fun with a lightweight naturally aspirated car rather than a sledgehammer. So I think that with just a couple changes that really should have been tuned better from the factory, I think this car would be absolutely good to go. So I haven't gotten around to installing that header yet, and I will be listing this car for sale soon, so I won't be installing it, but I'll get into the reasons why in a little bit. So going into the car, one thing I wish this generation had was a blind spot monitor, because the blind spots are manageable, but they definitely are there. And even on the higher trim level than this, they didn't have those monitors. I'll show you what that blind spot looks like more or less from the driver's seat. So yeah, you see there is a little bit of a blind spot. If you use your mirrors and look around, it definitely is manageable. And then you can see the double bubble roof inside. So the interior, these seats on a short drive seemed very comfortable at first. Nice sporty seats, side bolstering. Unfortunately, on anything for more than a 15-minute drive or so, it was apparent that the seats are almost cupped like a C shape. So it kind of forces your spine into a hunchback position, which isn't comfortable at all. There is no lumbar support. Lumbar wasn't a feature on this car. As you can see, there's no adjustment. So one of the first things I did was buy a lumbar pillow, and then I spent time trimming it and getting it into a shape that fits well with my spine. It's a memory foam pillow. You can get these for pretty cheap on Amazon, around $30 or so, and then just carve it up with a knife to something that fits your spine. So that is a consideration. And then the bottom of these seats is very stiff. It offers hardly any cushioning. It's there, but it's just very, very uncomfortable. So unlike my Boxster, which is very comfortable on long distance drives, this car is rather uncomfortable for anything more than an hour. Other things that are very cheap about the interior. So these cars didn't come from the factory with an armrest. So this padded sliding armrest was a factory option. I found it already installed because it is riveted onto this center console. I found the entire assembly online on eBay, brand new but never installed. And it was relatively simple to remove the center console and to swap that out. But that was an annoyance, especially if you use this as a daily driver or if you have a longer commute. So with that armrest installed, I found that which it is rather short, it's more of an elbow rest really than an armrest. So with that, my elbow on this side sits higher up than my elbow on the door side. So my hack is to use this travel memory foam pillow, and then I rest my elbow on it there. That being said, I do like how long and wide this door armrest is. On the ND2 Miata, it's very tapered, very narrow, and almost unusable with the door closed, unless you sit with the seat very far up if you're a shorter driver. And then I also like on these doors, there is a decent amount of space for a real size water bottle. I think this is around 24 ounces or so, and I could have went with a bigger one, really. So I love a bottle holder indoors. It has auto up and down windows for both driver and passenger. That's the first time I've had that. It is a pretty convenient function. One thing I don't like about the doors is on most two-door cars, doors are heavy, the doors are long. For whatever reason, on this car particularly, it seems like the doors always want to close on me. Like their factory default is to just close. So it kind of is a pain to get in and out of. The door is always trying to close on you unless the conditions are absolutely ideal. I haven't had that issue with just about every other two-door that I've owned. All right, on to some of the driver touch points and surfaces in the car. Steering wheel, I absolutely love. It's got bolsters that aren't too aggressive or too much of a hump here. The bolsters are just right. I like the steering wheel diameter. I like all the touch controls. They're easy, they work well on the steering wheel itself. Feedback. So it has an electric power steering system, and I would say that feedback on this BRZ is very similar to that of an NC Miata. And I just drove an NC3 Miata the other day, 2013, and I can say that even though this is an electric power steering system, feedback is very similar to that of the last generation Miata. It would be splitting hairs to say if one was better than the other, I feel, even though that Miata has a hydraulic rack. Now, on the ND2 Miata, that saw a electric power steering system, and I think it's very similar to this BRZ. So when it comes to BRZ versus the competition, steering feedback is there. It's not as good as an NA or an NB Miata with either a hydraulic rack or a manual rack. Throttle response. So it does have an electric throttle. It's not a cable driven throttle. Throttle response is great. It's near instantaneous. I have no problems with throttle response in this car. No complaints at all being electric versus cable. And then pedal placement. Pedal placement is good. So covering the brake pedal there, I can blip the throttle pedal and I think for track day driving, it would be nice if there was a little bit of an extension on that throttle pedal, so it was a little bit closer, because there have been times where I've whiffed and I've missed the throttle when I go for it. But just back road driving, when you're not driving, you know, at 8/10 or greater, I think the pedal placement's good. If I was going to keep the car for longer, I would look into a throttle pedal extension, just so there aren't those instances where I do go to blip it and I miss it. Then on to the gear shift. So the gear shift action isn't as snick as an NA, NB, or even NC Miata, even an ND Miata. It's an okay gear shift, but by any means it's not great. So I'll show you what I mean by that. If you move it, it's more of an elbow, like you have to get your elbow into it. It's not a wrist motion. It does feel like more of a Subaru rally car. It's not too far from the steering wheel, which is nice. But yeah, it definitely is more of a arm row. And this gearbox, when it's cold, it's very difficult to get into gear. The previous owner did say that he swapped out the fluid. I would definitely experiment with some of the manual transmission fluids out there, because cold, this gearbox is an absolute pain. There's been times where it's been very difficult to get into first or second until it's up to operating temperature. And then even when the gear is up to operating temperature, as I said, it's a mechanical feel, it's engaging, but I wouldn't put this in the top 10 gearboxes. There isn't any kind of rev hang, which is nice. So when it does come to heel toe downshifts, rev matching downshifts, all that fun stuff, there isn't any kind of rev hang, which I read a lot about in Honda products. Absolutely nothing to speak of here. If it is, I don't notice it. I do like how simple all the controls are. They're very straightforward. There's no confusion. If you've gotten into a car in your lifetime, you'll be able to figure out these controls very easily. And then when it comes to the infotainment system, if you will, or just how to use Bluetooth and radio, the buttons are all touch buttons. You don't have some kind of Mazda controller where you're messing with it down here and you can't actually use the touchscreen. You can use the touchscreen, everything's straightforward. You do get a glove box in this car. It has enough room to store things. I like the dash layout of this car. It does remind me a little bit of my 1990 Miata. It's very smooth, hides the airbags well. But what I don't like so much, and it almost reminds me of an early 90s Camaro, is the almost pillbox shape of the views outside of the car. So it has a very narrow view out of the windshield and out of the windows, out of the rear of the car, and I think that has to do with having an incredibly low roof line, and then having the roof so low, it just makes it not the most inviting space, whereas a Boxster has more of a rounded cabin. It's a little bit easier to see out of. It's a little bit more open and airy. This has a lot of cheap plastics, a lot of cheap black plastics, which just, it reminds me of a 90s Camaro. Let's see, in the rear seat, I did read articles that says it will baby, so you can put a car seat back there. There's anchor points, small child, if you will, maybe some high school friends, but I haven't had anybody in the back seat. But those seats do fold down, so that was one of the reasons, like I said, that this car did attract me. We'll look at the trunk very quickly. And there is a full-size spare in there, which is nice to have. It does fit a decent amount of stuff. You could fit all your track day gear in there. You could fit an extra set of wheels in there, as I said, so no complaints with that. All right, now why am I selling this car? So I've had this car for a little under a year, and in that time, it's been at a Subaru dealership multiple times for roughly 25 to 30% of my ownership. So first issue I had with this car was bad idle tensioners and failed pulleys. So the bearings and the pulleys failed, and the idle tensioner failed, made a really loud knocking sound. I have a video up of that on my YouTube channel. From what I understand, that's a very common problem with these engines, and you can expect that around every 40,000 miles. I've never had that issue with any of my cars in the past, to include Hondas, Mazdas, and it's not really something I'm looking forward to. However, I did get it fixed, problem solved. The larger issue was that when the car was there, they discovered an oil leak coming from my cam carriers. And then this whole front case has to come off of the car, if you will. So this whole aluminum case comes off of the car, and then it's sealed on by this RTV sealant, which you can see there. And if an excess amount of that RTV sealant is used, it can clog your oil passages and leak into the engine, and your engine won't get proper lubrication, could lead to engine failure, which is what happened in my car. Now, the oil leak that caused the engine to have to get pulled out to begin with, and then the dealer improperly sealed it with that RTV, that oil leak happened when there was only 30,000 miles on the engine, and it's my understanding that these oil leaks are common. So if you do buy one of these cars, know that your engine may have to come out every 30,000 miles or so. Look into the maintenance required for spark plugs, look into oil leaks from those cam carriers, from the front seals, and it just kind of adds up to a headache. I've never owned a car before where going forward my expectation would be, okay, this is going to have the engine out every X amount of miles for service. It's supposed to be a relatively cheap, reliable, easy to maintain Subaru. I know that Consumer Reports had it as their most reliable sports car. I saw an article not too long ago saying that they still find it their most reliable used sports car. However, I don't think that's the case. So unlike an NC Miata, I think overall reliability is way down. And for me, having this car at the dealership multiple times, most recently when the engine did fail due to that excess RTV, it had to receive an entirely new engine and was at the dealership for 2 months. And then the first issue I had where they had tried to fix that oil leak and they replaced the pulleys, that was at the dealership for about a month. And then there was another time that I had brought it back to the dealership after I discovered RTV being in the oil, that was at the dealership for maybe 2 weeks or so. So it's not too fun when you own a car but you can't drive it because it's broken, and then when you are driving it, you're worried about it breaking again. So that's been my ownership experience with it. That's why I am selling it. One more thing to mention is I did get an alignment with this car when I got those tires put on, and I used SPC lower camber bolts with it, and I was able to get a really nice alignment, and it drives perfect for the street. See, it's got a little bit more negative camber than it came with from the factory. From the factory, it's hard to get negative camber out of the front end. So those camber bolts did do the trick. They're around $25. So I highly recommend that. So that is my 2017 Subaru BRZ. I'm not too sure what I'll be replacing it with. I will be looking at the NC3 Miatas. I like them a lot. I find them comparable in their comfort level on the interior. The NDs have a little bit smaller interior for tall people. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I usually try to respond to all my comments when I see them. Thank you and happy motoring. To touch quickly on driving dynamics, so this being a fixed hardtop coupe, the chassis rigidity is going to be absolutely abundantly stiffer than that of a Miata, and I would say that would go across all generations, and that's the main competition for this car. So not only does the chassis feel a lot stiffer, a lot less flex, it allows the suspension to do its job. It also has a longer and wider wheelbase, which allows this car to offer a more poised ride and a more capable chassis. The only downside to that is around town, on back roads, and everywhere besides a track, is this car feels less fun. It feels more serious, it feels more capable, but it feels a lot less fun because of that if you do the majority of your driving on normal everyday roads or nice mountain back roads, anything like that. So if I could offer a comparison between the two, that would be it. More capable, less fun. And even though the suspension is a lot more capable, it is soft enough where it's very comfortable in daily driving, and it really strikes the balance between being capable without beating you up every day. So it doesn't crash over bumps, it soaks up everything that it needs to, but it is very controlled and capable. So if you were thinking about using this car as a daily driver on the stock suspension, I think it's pretty close to being perfect, and I wouldn't modify it quickly with coilovers or anything like that, lowering springs, until you decide that the suspension isn't stiff enough for you, because it is very nicely tuned from the factory. I will add that the view out the front of the car with the front wheel arches, that does make for the car very easy to place when you are driving spiritedly. You know exactly where the edges of the car are. So that is a very nice view to have. One more thing I want to point out with this car that I'm not the most fond of is the shape of the rear view mirror. You see it's a clipped dog ear shape, and that somewhat restricts the view that you have surrounding your vehicle to the rear. And that differs from the Boxster in that that car has more of an elongated oval shape rear view mirror. And I noticed on the second generation BRZs and GR86s that just came out, it does have more of an oval shape to give you a better view.